Tonight, we step directly into the heat and horror of the Vietnam War. Forget the politics and the movies. This is about one soldier, one breath, and one moment of terror. Your simple goal is survival. Close your eyes. Let the silence of the jungle settle and face the truth. If you were stuck in the Vietnam War, this is exactly what would happen to you. Before this video continues, I just want to say something from the heart. It takes me days of effort and sleepless nights to bring you these videos, but very few people subscribe. I'm honestly disheartened because every video I make is for you, to entertain, inspire, and give you something meaningful to watch. Please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. Your support means everything to me. It's the only thing that keeps me motivated to work harder and bring you even better content every time. Your ordeal begins not with the enemy, but with the air itself. The first sensory reality that assaults you is the stifling, pervasive heat and the relentless smell of the jungle. Imagine stepping into a sauna that never ends, where the humidity is so thick it feels less like air and more like a warm, suffocating blanket pressing down on your chest, making every breath a heavy, sticky effort. You are carrying a mandatory load: your rifle, your ammo, your water, your helmet, your medical supplies. A weight that, with every passing hour, feels exponentially heavier. Every movement, even the simple act of standing still, induces a torrent of corrosive, salty sweat. This moisture never evaporates. The jungle environment is too saturated, too dense. Your uniform, your socks, the leather of your boots, and even the canvas straps of your pack are perpetually soaked. This constant dampness creates the perfect, festering ecosystem for jungle rot and immersion foot. Tiny cuts become weeping wounds. Skin chafes and breaks down, and the flesh on your feet whitens and crumbles from continuous, inescapable saturation. The environment is actively trying to consume you, turning your own body's moisture against you in a relentless process of degradation. Compounding this physical misery is the overwhelming scent profile of the jungle. It is the deep, sickening smell of decomposition, of mildew, rotting vegetation, and fermentation mixed with the heavy chemical odor of insect repellent and the metallic tang of old ordnance. But most intimately, it is the smell of fear and unwashed bodies, a pervasive human musk that clings to your gear and your memories. This scent tells your primitive brain, constantly and without fail, that you are in a place of sickness and continuous peril. You yearn for the simple luxury of being truly clean and truly dry, but that relief is denied to you for days, weeks, or even months at a time. This slow, physical erosion ensures that the war is permanently etched into your sense of touch and smell long before a bullet ever finds its mark. The second great torment is the terrifying, deceptive complexity of sound. In the dense canopy, there is no true silence, only a constant, intricate symphony of natural noise that your survival depends on interpreting correctly. Your ears become fine-tuned instruments, perpetually straining to filter the chaotic background noise, the loud thrum of insects, the unsettling chirps of nocturnal creatures, and the quiet, steady drip, drip, drip of condensation. You are constantly searching for the anomaly, the sound that does not belong. Is that a monkey swinging through the trees, or the faint rustle of a camouflaged enemy setting up an ambush? Is that the natural crack of a branch under the weight of the wind, or the subtle, calculated snap of a tripwire hidden beneath the leaves? This auditory hypervigilance is a profound form of psychological torture, eroding your sanity hour by hour, forcing your nervous system into a continuous, draining state of high alert. You dare not relax, because the penalty for misinterpreting a sound is immediate, brutal death. Then, the delicate balance of the jungle is violently shattered by the loud, the sudden, concussive tearing sound of automatic fire, so close it feels like a physical punch to the chest, immediately overrides all other senses. The deep, heavy boom of mortar fire vibrates through the damp earth and through your very bones, leaving a temporary, ringing deafness in its wake. But perhaps the most psychologically complex sound of all is the distant, rhythmic whop, whop, whop of the medevac helicopter approaching. This noise offers the promise of medical evacuation and safety, but it is inextricably linked to trauma, injury, and death. It is the soundtrack to agony and despair for those who need it, and a terrifying harbinger of bad luck for those who are watching. This relentless oscillation between the deceptive quiet of the jungle threat and the sudden, overwhelming noise of combat ensures that your mind can never achieve true, deep rest. The sensory assault continues in the momentary reprieve of a meal with the bland, unappetizing taste of rations. Your fuel is the infamous C ration, or the later MCI, a canned meal that is often stale, flavorless, and eaten cold, quickly, and in silence to avoid giving away your position. Food is stripped of all pleasure. It is merely a chemical requirement for sustained existence. The ham and lima beans, or the bland spaghetti in metallic-tasting sauce, is chewed slowly in the dark. The only source of genuine comfort or sweetness is often a stale, chalky chocolate bar, or the forbidden relief of a quick cigarette. This monotonous, cold, and unappetizing diet adds to the cumulative psychological weariness. It creates a deep, constant ache of homesickness, a yearning for the simple, forgotten taste of a clean cold soda or a freshly cooked meal. The very act of eating in Vietnam is another chore, another ritual that reinforces your profound separation from civilization and comfort. Finally, the deepest level of sensory fear resides in the unseen threat and touch. You are fighting a war where the battlefield is beneath your feet and the enemy is hidden. Your eyes are constantly strained, frantically scanning the ground for the slightest disturbance, a barely visible tripwire, small area of disturbed earth, a cleverly concealed punji stake trap. You walk with an unnatural, strained gait, your focus pulled away from the tree line and locked onto the precarious ground. The fear is tactile, a deep, chilling dread that every step is a catastrophic gamble. These booby traps, often smeared with contaminants to guarantee infection, are designed not necessarily to kill, but to maim and slow down the entire patrol. The sudden, agonizing shock of stepping on one is a horrifying fulfillment of your constant tactile paranoia. This persistent sense of vulnerability, this complete inability to trust the very ground beneath your feet, ensures that your nervous system is permanently overloaded, constantly signaling danger. This deep, relentless state of alert where every sense is distorted, violated, and ultimately betrayed by the environment, is the fundamental reason why the soldier who enters the jungle can never truly survive the war intact. Even if he walks out alive, the sensory destruction is total, permanent, and complete. The Vietnam War was a unique torment of the human psyche, not just because of the violence, but because of the way it distorted the perception of time. Your 13-month tour of duty was a psychological trap where days crawled with agonizing slowness, yet the war itself flashed by in moments of blinding, terrifying speed. You were trapped in a continuous, endless loop of the endless weight and monotony. Life in the jungle was defined by the relentless, grinding cycle of search and destroy. You walk, you sweat, you wait, you walk again. The landscape rarely changes. The mission parameters remain vague, and the days melt into weeks without any sense of progress or meaningful climax. This vast emptiness, this lack of defined front lines or measurable success, creates a profound psychological strain. The clock stops ticking in the conventional sense. Instead, time is measured by the slow degradation of your boot leather, the decreasing number of pages left in the paperback you carry, and the diminishing contents of your sea ration box. You become obsessed with arbitrary milestones, making it to the next riverbed, the next resupply drop, or the next rotation of watch duty. This monotony is a silent killer, leeching the purpose and dynamism from life, forcing the mind to dwell on the misery rather than move past it. The soldier exists in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a war that may or may not happen today, but which is guaranteed to come eventually. This endless, psychological drag ensures that the first 6 months feel like a decade, and the memory of home becomes increasingly distant and unreal. When violence does erupt, the experience of time flips, creating a terrifying duality known as slow-motion violence. During an ambush, or when a firefight erupts from the dense foliage, the world does not speed up. It becomes hyper-focused and agonizingly slow. The seconds stretch into minutes. You hear the distinct, individual crack of every incoming round, and the tracer fire seems to drift slowly through the air, giving your mind enough time to register its path and the terrifying finality of its destination. The simple act of diving for cover or reloading your M16 feels like an eternity in motion. Your brain, flooded with adrenaline, processes information at an impossible speed, recording every granule of dirt that flies up, every drop of sweat, and the specific expression of terror on your comrade's face. This slow-motion agony is a self-inflicted torment. You have time to think, time to regret, and time to realize the absolute vulnerability of your position before the action is even over. You see the flash, you hear the muffled sound, and your body reacts before your mind fully comprehends. But your mind has all the time in the world to experience the terror of the impending impact. When the fighting finally ceases and the silence returns, you're left with a chilling temporal hangover. The actual engagement might have lasted only 60 seconds, but in your memory, it will stretch for a lifetime, a vivid, agonizing tableau played back in endless, harrowing detail. The only thing that maintains the sanity of a soldier in this suspended reality is the ritual of the countdown. Your 13-month tour is the ultimate finish line, and the obsession with time shifts entirely to the calendar. You become a short timer, defined by the rapidly decreasing number of days left until your ticket home. The focus is no longer on the mission, but on a single, personal calculation. The date of your Diros, date of estimated return from overseas. Every moment of free time is spent obsessively marking off days on a small calendar, carving hash marks into a helmet, or physically tearing away days from a piece of paper. This obsession leads to the phenomenon known as short timer's fever, a profound spike in anxiety and paranoia. As the end approaches, the stakes become unbearably high. Every patrol, every routine movement feels 10 times more dangerous, because to be wounded or killed now would be the ultimate cosmic injustice. You pull back, you take fewer risks, and you rely on the fresh replacements, FNGs, fucking new guys, to take the dangerous point position. The irony of time is cruel. After enduring months of endless misery, the final weeks, the period that should bring relief, become the most psychologically debilitating, saturated with the fear of losing everything at the 11th hour. If you are fortunate enough to survive the tour and board the aircraft, the final trap is sprung. The future is fast. The transition from the slow, hyper-vigilant existence of the jungle to the hyper-accelerated pace of American society is a profound shock. The world you return to is moving too fast. People speak too quickly. The noise is overwhelming, and the pace of life seems trivial and frantic. Your nervous system, conditioned to spend weeks scanning 100 square yards for a booby trap, cannot adjust to the sudden onslaught of sensory input and meaningless activity. The 6 months you spent fighting feels more real and longer than the years you spent growing up, and the people you left behind, family, friends, loved ones, seem disconnected, unable to grasp the vast, slow trauma you endured. You become a temporal exile, a person whose inner clock is forever slowed to the speed of combat and jungle rot. The real world moves on, but a large, vital piece of your consciousness remains suspended in the muddy, timeless green of Vietnam. This inability to reintegrate and calibrate your internal time with external reality is the final, lonely consequence of the time trap, ensuring that the war remains a permanent, slow-motion memory. The American soldier in Vietnam faced a war unlike any other, defined by 3 relentless, converging enemies. The first was the enemy you could see, the second, the environment you couldn't defeat, and the third, the insidious war you carried inside your own mind. Together, these forces created an inescapable crucible of fear and exhaustion. Your initial, constant combat was against the enemy of nature. The Vietnamese jungle was not just a backdrop, it was an active, suffocating opponent. The climate was the primary aggressor, a punishing, corrosive combination of extreme heat and relentless humidity that turned every movement into a physical ordeal. Your body was perpetually soaked in sweat that never evaporated, leading to the rapid decay of flesh known as jungle rot and immersion foot. You fought a constant battle against disease, malaria, dengue fever, and severe dysentery, which were often more effective at incapacitating a patrol than enemy bullets. You were prey to an endless, silent army of parasites, leeches clinging to your skin, burrowing insects, and venomous snakes, all of which turned the simplest rest into a constant struggle for survival. The terrain itself was designed to exhaust you, forcing you to constantly navigate thick vegetation, razor grass, and deep, muddy paddies that made every kilometer an agonizing labor. This environmental enemy stripped you of your health, your energy, and your simple human comfort, ensuring you were physically weakened before you ever fired a shot. The second, highly unpredictable threat was the enemy of man, specifically the elusive, determined forces of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. This was a war defined by invisibility and paranoia. There was no clear front line, no safe rear echelon. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. You lived in a state of hypervigilance, knowing that the person smiling by the roadside could be an informant, and the peaceful-looking village could conceal tunnels and weapons caches. The most terrifying tactic was the ambush, a sudden, chaotic explosion of automatic fire and rocket-propelled grenades that erupted from the dense foliage, often at point-blank range. This violence was brief, brutal, and left no time for preparation or thought, only instinctive reaction. Compounding this was the unique horror of tunnel warfare. Descending into the dark, claustrophobic network of Viet Cong tunnels was to enter a war where every sense was distorted and every breath was a risk. These subterranean mazes were packed with booby traps, poisonous snakes, and unseen enemies, turning the simple act of exploration into a profound test of nerve. Outside, the booby traps continued the psychological assault. The simple, devastating punji stake trap, or the tripwire linked to a grenade. These weapons were designed not just to kill, but to maim and terrorize, ensuring that every single step you took, whether on patrol or just walking to the latrine, was a moment of potential, life-altering agony. The human enemy was not just a physical threat, he was a psychological architect of fear and constant suspicion. The most enduring conflict, however, was waged against the enemy within. This was the moral and psychological toll of a deeply unpopular, uncertain war, fought in a landscape where victory was never clearly defined. The central trauma was PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, a silent wound born of sustained chronic stress. You witness friends dying. You are forced to commit acts that violate your moral code. The accidental death of a civilian, the destruction of a home, and you are forced to process this reality in isolation. This leads to moral injury, a profound psychological distress resulting from having to violate core moral beliefs. In the constant absence of safety, the mind begins to fracture. You suffer from unrelenting guilt and isolation, unable to share the true horrors of your daily life with the people you write to back home. When you finally leave the jungle, this enemy comes with you. The hypervigilance, the inability to trust the quiet, the sudden, violent flashbacks. All these are carried in the cargo hold of your mind. You become a stranger to your own family, disconnected from a society that either ignored the war or openly protested it. The final, brutal truth is that you can retreat from the jungle, but you can never retreat from the man the war created. This internal battle, the lasting legacy of moral conflict and mental exhaustion, ensures that the war continues long after the ceasefire. This triple threat, the jungle, the enemy, and the mind, made true survival an impossibility. Survival in Vietnam was not merely a physical battle, It was a profound, emotional, and spiritual war fought in isolation. The soldier quickly learned that the greatest distance was not the thousands of miles separating him from America, but the emotional chasm separating his reality from the world he was communicating with. This journey was one of perpetual loneliness, culminating in a devastating feeling of disconnection upon return. The first ritual of maintaining sanity was the lie in the letter. Communication with home was vital, yet entirely compromised. When you sit down with a pencil and paper, exhausted and covered in mud, you cannot write the truth. You cannot describe the paralyzing fear of the ambush, the stench of decaying bodies, or the sheer, grinding monotony of the misery. Instead, you write a careful facade of normalcy, an edited version of your life. You mention the heat, the lack of good food, and perhaps a humorous anecdote about a comrade. This is a deliberate, necessary deception designed to protect two parties, your family from the agonizing truth, and yourself from the need to articulate the unspeakable. This constant editing creates an immediate, deep emotional isolation. The person writing the letter and the person reading it are living on two different planets, sharing no common reality. The letters you receive in return, filled with talk of college applications, new cars, or local gossip, only reinforce this disconnection, highlighting the triviality of life back home compared to the mortal stakes you face daily. The letters become a painful mirror, reflecting the impossibility of ever truly explaining what you are enduring. This self-imposed censorship is the first step in creating the emotional chasm that you will never fully cross. Compounding the isolation is the forgotten memory. The reality of the jungle is so immediate, so visceral, that it actively consumes your ability to recall the past. Days bleed into weeks of exhaustion and hypervigilance, and the clear, vibrant memories of home, the sound of your father's voice, the smell of your mother's cooking, the details of your girlfriend's face, begin to fade, warp, and distort. You cling desperately to small physical tokens, a worn photograph, a lucky charm, as anchors to a world that feels increasingly abstract and unreal. This forgetting is a profound betrayal of the self. The jungle demands that your focus be entirely on the present moment, on the survival of the next second. Anything that does not contribute to that goal is discarded by the exhausted mind. This emotional erasure is frightening. You worry that by the time you return, you will be unable to recognize or connect with the life you fought to protect. This gradual loss of your identity before the war leaves a void, a space that is quickly filled by the raw, brutal reality of combat, ensuring the war defines you more completely than your past ever could. The emotion that dominates the soldier's inner life, yet is rarely expressed, is the unwritten confession, rage, and despair. The soldier is forced to internalize a devastating mix of emotions: rage at the unfairness of the war, the incompetence of command, and the hostility of the enemy; despair over the loss of comrades and the pointlessness of their sacrifice; and guilt over the necessity of civilian casualties and the acts they were forced to commit. These emotions are dangerous in the closed environment of a combat unit. They must be suppressed, channeled only into the fierce aggression needed to survive. This emotional repression becomes a psychological time bomb. The true confessions The fear, the screaming nightmares, the moral horror are locked deep inside, where they fester and grow. There is no therapy, no safe space to process this trauma. The only outlet is often alcohol, drugs, or the dark, cynical humor shared amongst the immediate unit. When the time comes to leave, the soldier is an emotional vessel filled to the brim with unprocessed trauma. The war may end physically when you step on the plane, but the war of the soul, the battle against the despair and rage you carried, is only just beginning. The culmination of this emotional isolation is the silent mailbox, the profound psychological shock of returning home after months of yearning for the sounds and sights of America. You arrive back to a world that is either indifferent, hostile, or simply incapable of understanding. The very people you protected treat you as an alien. The family you wrote letters to cannot bridge the gap created by your sustained silence. You speak the language of war, a language of silence, tension, and sudden noise, and the civilian world speaks a language of trivia and comfort that you no longer comprehend. The trauma you locked away in the jungle explodes in the safety of your own home. The sudden, paralyzing panic attacks triggered by a loud noise, the inability to sleep without medication, the chronic feeling of being an outsider, the emotional chasm you created to survive the war now prevents you from living a normal life. You realize the ultimate, cruel irony. You survived the bullets, the mud, and the traps, only to be permanently defeated by the emotional loneliness that the war required you to embrace. In the chaos and weightlessness of the Vietnam War, the soldier's life was often defined by the small, tangible objects he carried. These weren't just tools, they were talismans of survival, carrying an emotional weight disproportionate to their size. They served as anchors to sanity, agents of destruction, and silent chroniclers of the soldier's experience. The most iconic of these artifacts is the ubiquitous Zippo lighter. It was far more than a simple fire starter. Its famous windproof design made it utterly reliable in the damp, driving monsoons and high winds of the jungle, establishing it as a small, metallic symbol of dependability in a world of profound uncertainty. The quiet, distinctive, metallic click of the Zippo opening was the sound of a momentary reprieve. The lighting of a cigarette, the heating of sea rations with a sliver of C4 explosive, or the simple act of creating a small, personal flame in the crushing darkness. Crucially, the Zippo was the soldier's canvas for rebellion and sentiment. Soldiers often customized them, using small, roadside engraving shops to etch personal messages, poems, defiant slogans, or crude drawings. Phrases like, "I am going to heaven because I have served my time in hell," or "Look at my lighter, not my face," transformed the device into a personalized shield and a statement of internal alienation. The Zippo also held a dark duality. The term Zippo job or Zippo raid became the grim vernacular for setting fire to rice huts or structures during search and destroy missions. Thus, this single, small object perfectly embodies the contradiction of the soldier's existence, a source of comfort and a necessary instrument of destruction. Next, consider the smallest, yet most fiercely guarded, tool in the jungle, the P-38 can opener. This tiny, stamped piece of metal, often worn on a dog tag chain, was the soldier's key to sustenance. It accompanied the dreaded sea rations, and its loss was an immediate crisis, forcing a man to eat cold. metallic-tasting food by clumsily tearing open the can with a knife or bayonet, an act of desperation and shame. The P-38 represents the utter stripping down of existence to its most primitive needs, the daily ritual of using it, the smooth, efficient motion of opening the can, followed by the silent, quick consumption of the meal, was a reminder that survival required absolute focus on simple, functional necessities. The P-38 embodies the monotony of the war, where dignity was reduced to the successful acquisition and consumption of a few hundred cold calories. The most essential piece of protective gear was the M1 helmet, or steel pot. While its primary purpose was to shield the wearer from shrapnel, its function expanded dramatically in the field, transforming it into a multi-purpose survival vessel. The heavy steel shell became the soldier's basin for shaving, his temporary bucket for collecting rainwater, and even a makeshift pot for boiling stream water in a desperate attempt to sterilize it against jungle parasites. At night, it could serve as a rudimentary pillow or a cold, heavy shield against the rain. Worn with the canvas Mitchell pattern cover, the helmet also acted as a canvas for nonverbal communication, secured by an elastic band used to hold insect repellent, cigarettes, or small personal notes. The helmet was your most constant, palpable form of shelter and defense, a cold, steel dome that stood as the final barrier between the precarious reality of life and the sudden finality of death. You wore its weight and its cold presence so long that when you finally took it off, you felt strangely exposed and vulnerable. The most emotionally potent items were the wallet photo and letters from home. These were often water-stained, faded pieces of glossy paper or thin, ink-smudged stationery, tucked away inside a uniform pocket or taped to the inside of the helmet band. The photograph, usually depicting a wife, child, or family member, served as a fragile emotional anchor to a world that felt increasingly distant and abstract. The contents of the letters, filled with news of trivial, comfortable civilian life, simultaneously provided vital connection and reinforced the soldier's profound sense of alienation. These objects were a painful reminder of the life he fought to protect and the growing gap between the man who left and the weary, hyper-vigilant soldier who was now struggling to remember the details of his own past. They were his reason for surviving, but also a constant source of anxiety that the person he was fighting for, or who he used to be, no longer existed. Finally, the ultimate symbol of the entire journey was the plane ticket home. This simple piece of paper, often crumpled and stained, represented the completion of the countdown, the final, agonizing reward for surviving the 13-month tour. It symbolized salvation and imminent freedom, serving as the obsessive focus that carried the soldier through the deadly final weeks of his deployment. However, the ticket was the start of the final trap. As the soldier boarded the plane, the ticket allowed him to physically escape the jungle, but it facilitated the psychological transfer of the war. The physical gear and the mud were left behind, but the invisible cargo, the sights, sounds, and moral weight of the jungle were carried back in his mind. The plane ticket was the prelude to the invisible war of PTSD, proving that while the objects were abandoned, the internal weight they represented remained, defining the soldier's lonely battle for decades to come. And now, we leave the fear behind. Let the sounds of that history fade and allow your own mind to find rest. The exhaustion The noise, the paranoia, it's all over. You are safe now. The night is deep, and the peace you have earned is waiting. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and drift into the silence.